Hello, Culture Matters podcast. We are back again with another culture topic. Follow me on Instagram, Jay Doran _ the culture man for culture topics, short clips on business, culture, life, etc. Today I'm talking about the heart count, which was an approach Herb Kelleher of Southwest Airlines took with his culture. So the description is he believed that building a culture of love, humor, and dedication among employees would make them happy, which in turn improve customer satisfaction. Keller famously prioritized employees over customers, believing that the satisfied employees would take care of the customers during business, doing driving business success. Believing that satisfied employees would take care of the customers, driving business success. I hear this a lot. I see this a lot. This has been an idea for some time, this employees first attitude in our culture. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily the right attitude to go with. Meaning, does it have to be one or the other? And is the employee first mentality actually a reaction to the call to a greater awareness of the responsibility that comes with management in the 21st century, but an overemphasis on actions and behaviors around employees that actually ironically undermines customer service. And the reason I think there's irony in this ideology of employee first, because if it becomes too dogmatic, what ends up happening is that the institution actually forgets about the customers. That what I've observed actually in the field with these employee first philosophies, if there's certain variables missing, then the culture ends up becoming top down, where management abdicates responsibility and too much falls on the employees, and the customers are unsatisfied because the employees are unsatisfied. It's like I think the order matters. I think it's customer first with an increased awareness on the responsibility that comes with managing people. I don't think it's like the how people have taken this idea and taken it too far would be how I would articulate it. That the idea of let's build this winning culture, let's build this awesome culture, oftentimes can digress into what can we do to control our people? What can we do to get to do the least amount possible as it relates to leadership and management, and get the most out of our people to reap the most benefit with the least amount of sacrifice? That's what that I don't know if that's intentional or an unintentional. I mean, I have an inkling. I have a speculation that it could actually be an unintentional byproduct of the overemphasis on the employee that leads to an over expectation of the employee and an underemphasis on customer service. Meaning, Herb Kelleher could actually have believed this. He could have actually believed this belief, this 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 acceptance of a philosophy around love and humor and dedication to his people is what actually led him to be an engaged executive, an all-in sacrificial leader, putting his, representing his values in his actions. That belief could have driven him to actually put the customer first while thinking he's putting the people first. His awareness around the importance of the people drove his behaviors to create an environment conducive to customer satisfaction through each conversation, through each day that he showed up, through each, and showed up early and left late, or you know that belief. Like, he could have believed that that's what it was, but that's what it actually was that was driving him to act in a way that was ultimately engaging with the customer first. The customer has to be first for the system to even work, because the systems exist because of the customer. It brings me back to Drucker. The purpose of a business is to create a customer. The customer's existence is part of the purpose of the organization, because the purpose of the organization is to serve the customer. So I agree with an awareness around the importance of employees' satisfaction, but employee satisfaction is going to come as a consequence of focusing on the customer, and the leadership at every level sacrificing and engaging and representing the values that are on the wall, that are written down, that then creates an inspiration, a spiritual relationship and reaction of those that are employed by the organization to go beyond themselves, to go the extra mile, to act in the benefit of the organization as a byproduct of acting in the benefit of the customer. So my point is this, that Herb Kelleher may have believed in the heart count, and that's what led, that belief could have inspired him to put in the work to model the values that that ultimately represent that the customer is first, is why we're all here. And in that intention and in that philosophy, he was acting out the values that would lead his people to be more dedicated, to love, to have a fun environment. Like, no matter what one is, says or thinks, the customer is going to be first, because the existence of the organization is a byproduct of the customer existing. Its inherent purpose is to solve the problem for the customer, not to solve an objective, yeah, not to solve the problem for the employee. There's different problems that the organization's existence in solving the customer's problem solves for the employee, like a safe work environment, like upward mobility and career advancement, like a place that has energy that energizes those. But that's going to come as a consequence of serving customers. If you really break that down, that comes with sacrifice, that comes with acting out constructive values that make the experience of the customer's journey more meaningful for the customer, and thereby inspires the best out of those that work within an organization to get behind that, get behind those values, get behind that purpose, get behind that. If I think people, at least at the very least, misunderstand these types of philosophies of employees first, where an overemphasis on the employee can actually lead to an underemphasis on the customer, and therefore, ironically, an underemphasis on the employee as a byproduct of the customer not being helped at the highest level possible. Like, I guess the simplest way to say this would be, it's not an either or, it's both that matter, and the order is foundation. And I think, the timeliness of the employee first attitude is part of the zeitgeist of our time, the shifting plates of our general, world culture changing, where there's macro tectonic plates shifting that's influencing the narratives of business, but the business hasn't changed. Our culture is changing, which is changing the conversation, but not necessarily changing the structure of business or the order of things or the process of how it works. The purpose of the business is to solve the customer's problems, is to create a customer. We may have a higher awareness around how we relate to our employees and what the expectation is of management to employees, and that responsibility and authority have to, as one gains more authority, their responsibility has to grow. Their ability to respond to the obligations that come with that authority has to grow. So here are some of my notes. Here are the issues, everything. We can lose sight of the customers, ironically, because of the overemphasis on the employees. There's this, I've watched it happen. There's this entitlement that manifests employees um, as a consequence of disengagement of management, which sows the seeds of resentment of employees to management, which dilutes trust, which slows productivity down, which has a negative effect on the customers. And so if we have a Herb like character, he may have had to believe that he believed that belief led him to do things that actually reflected a care for the customer first and the employees, because responsibility is modeled, it's observed, it's experienced, and accountability is given in speech or taken in action. So he could have believed that, but his actions were actually saying, demonstrating that the customer was first. It's just the zeitgeist of our times is this awareness and this attention around the value of employee, as human beings, and more than cogs and wheels is um, acutely important, or has become an awareness conversation. So here's another note: we can replace or distract from the real family. So like one of the manifestations of that employee first is the family, the family, the family type attitude. We're a family. That will can naturally manifest that people are getting along as a consequence of knowing what they're doing, knowing why they're doing it, being in a core competency, like in their role and engagement. But by no means does it make a lot of sense long term, I would argue, for the organization to be the family when there is actually a family. And ultimately, the employee is responsible for their family or their future family, and they're accountable to the organization to do their job, to get the resources necessary to create a to feed the family, to actualize the family's goals, to represent responsibility for the family's values. And when the organization does not hold the employee to account, they don't have that feedback loop, that awareness loop, that they're being the best version of themselves at work, which will bring the best resource accumulation to the family. When the company is not respecting, it is not as responsible as it needs to be to the employees got less power to hold them to account. They're one source of income, one resource for the family. They could be responsible in the home and irresponsible at work because the organization's not being held to account, and therefore it's being irresponsible. And then they're having regardless of how responsible they're trying to be, they're having a terrible, toxic, meaningless, boring, painful experience at work because their organization doesn't have their shit together. And now they're just showing up to provide for their family because they're accountable to their children, they're accountable to their partner, their spouse, whatever. So they're going to be proportionally responsible to who they're held to account by. Then they have a miserable job that they hate, but they do it because it's their obligation to do it. Now, one could say in a different generation, that was just the way it was. This idea that you had to be happy at work is silly to think about when your kids are starving. It's like, how about you be less entitled and be a bit more sacrificial? And, there's there got to be some degree of honor in like giving your life up, for your kids or your family. Like who wouldn't say that they would give their life up for their children if they were a parent? Like I would, it would just be a common sense thing to think that a psychologically healthy human being would say, I would give my life up for my child. Well, that's what one does when they go to work. They're doing it to provide food and water and development for the child. Well, and so how meaningful their career is going to be will be have a relationship with how responsible the leadership of the organization. I should say management, because leadership and management get construed often. It's like management is structure, leadership is values, how they're acted out. Because do we really consider a tyrant a leader? Do we really consider a tyrant a leader? And in some sense, they are, if they're leading us or forcing us. It's the difference between force and influence. Anyway, so the organization, if it's not being held to account and able to respond to its obligations to shareholders, to shareholders, to ultimately a consequence of that will be a negative or less meaningful, more difficult work environment for the employees, where now, if they're responsible to who they're held to account by outside of the organization, they're just going to have to show up and do the best they can for their family, for their loved ones, for those outside of themselves. And if they're unwilling to do that, obviously that will reveal where they're at in their psychological journey. Is it that with more information, there's entitlement? We have more information, more at least perceivable opportunity, maybe more opportunity. There's an entitlement with that. If the employees become more entitled, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, that's a negative. It's entitled to opportunity as a consequence of more information. The responsibility of management has to grow proportionally to the entitlement of the people. So is the emphasis on employees first a cultural reaction to the increased entitlement of the employees as a consequence of increased information that's ironically undermining the customer experience? No, the employee experience, because customers are actually getting the worst service, because the order matters of things. It's if the leader, management's really engaged in the customers, a byproduct of that would be values acted out, which make the work experience more valuable for those that are participating in it, so that they can ultimately be responsible to the obligations of their families, of their homes outside of the organization. Number 3, I'll digress. Can create disengaged CEO founder? Absolutely. I think that's actually a symptom of that belief. It's almost, I want to say Herb Kelleher. It's like Nietzsche, Christianity died on the cross, he said, because Christ was so perfect, everyone followed that belief system was less perfect. I wonder if it's a scenario like that with Herb Kelleher. If it really was true, which we don't even know, because it could have just been a projection and he wasn't the way it sounds like he was. But let's say he was. His actions were in alignment with his philosophy. But that belief structure is what drove him to actually put the customer first, thinking he was putting the employee first, because that was part of the belief structure that actually led him to put the customer first. That was what motivated him. He did it for his employees, but he really was sacrificing himself for the customer that helped the employees, which is what drove him. Now everyone that's listening to that philosophy doesn't quite understand what he was actually up to, and so they attempt to focus on the employee and ironically undermine the employee, because they're not focused on the customer, which makes them disengaged, which makes the employee actually resentful, because they end up doing the lion's share of the work to the customer. I think that manifests as a consequence of this ideology. So here are some things to leave off on. If capital allocation matches the philosophy of employee first, skin in the game, does the organization reinvest into itself? That could be a sign that its beliefs it believes what it says it believes or thinks it believes. Follow the money. Where's the money going? Where's the money going? And we, with the intention below awareness, even could be to reinvest into the employees just to get more out of them, so that there's less responsibility for those that decide to start the company. And I think that's one of the fastest ways to build an environment that's toxic, that undermines the upward mobility, the thoughtfulness, the individual sovereignty, idea meritocracy of a company culture. So follow the money because the money will tell the story. Energy would be high, attracts recruits, makes great advertising. Yeah. So like from a brand standpoint, it's Munger, invert, always invert. Um, let's end. I want to end here. I have to be careful. You have to be careful. We have to be careful as human beings that we don't convince ourselves that we're doing things that we're not doing or not yet doing as a consequence of talking about them and proselytizing. I have to be careful of that as a teacher in this context. And you have to be careful of that, whatever it is that you're responsible for. And companies have to be careful of that. CEOs, leaders, or those in positions of authority that are managing organizations, that are modeling values for the people. So how do I end this on like a note that makes clear sense? The heart count, if Herb or anybody is acting out love, I mean, you have to define that. What does that mean in the context of business? That's a curious thing to talk about. It's another podcast. Humor, dedication. Um, if Herb was doing those things, let's say Herb's on the plane. He's on a Southwest plane, and he's going to be what do they call it? A stewardess, and he's modeling love and humor for the other stewardesses as he in relationship with how he relates to the customer. They're seeing those values. Now, Herb can do that with the customer. They're seeing those values. And then, I guess, in some sense, not do that with his people. Maybe something's missing. Maybe that's what this idea of employee first is speaking to. Hey, don't forget about the people when you're overly obsessed with the customers, because we're creatures of paradox. We have blind spots. We could be great in one medium and absolutely nasty in another. But then you flip the switch and think Herb is acting as a stewardess. He's indifferent to the customer and he's just modeling love and dedication and humor to his fellow stewardesses. Is he unintentionally disengaging the stewardesses on the effects of the customer? Now it's like we're just having fun at work. We're not actually serving. Like, how is Herb teaching his people how to live the values? Is it them watching him relate to the customer, or is it them experiencing him and how they relate to him? From a value of, I would argue, from a customer satisfaction, for a culture, like a business alignment, just business, customers getting a good, valuable experience, growth, profit potential. It's going to be him modeling to the customer as the people seeing it. I think in the zeitgeist of our times, the idea of the employee first, Herb benefits and everyone benefits, customer included, from him also relating to his people in that way. Also, it's an also. However, if Herb only models to the people that way, the love, the humor, the dedication, and now there's a silo between, or a separation between him and the customer, because it's just him and the people, that unintentionally undermines the people's modeling those values to the customer. They model them with one another, and it becomes more of like a club med, where ultimately now that has a long-term negative effect on the customer experience, which undermines the employee experience. So it's my argument would be her modeling for the employees relating to the customer is check that box, and modeling the values with the people is the answer, is the integration of this idea of employees first, customers second. I don't believe it's employees first, customers second. I believe it's customers first and employees matter. Culture matters. integration. It's both and. It's and the rituals that the company acts out and where we reinvest and how we gather and how we listen and tell the truth and will reveal that integration. And ultimately, it will not be perfect. It will not be a utopia because that's not how life works at this moment. So those are some of my thoughts on this heart count approach, which is a awesome um, idea. And the challenge is acting it out, living it out. And um, it sounds like Herb Kelleher was an example of a person people desired to work with and a company that has had a great history of successful growth. The question is, to me, would be, was that idea something that just drove him to put the customers first, even if he didn't recognize that within awareness, that then others could latch onto and actually not actually do it to the level that he did it because they're not really clear on how he actually did it. And that would be where I think something for you to think about if you're listening to this. Follow me at Jay Doran _ the culture man on Instagram for more culture topics. Please leave us a review and we will see you next time.